Hi, I'm Judith Hope, and I'm an Akashic Channel and Starseed Intuitive. And today we're going to be talking about a very unique group of centaurs who came here from another universe. Or should I say, they were sent here from another universe. But before we get started, I do have to remind you to hit like and subscribe. So, all of the information that you're going to hear today is channeled directly from the Akashic Records. If you haven't heard of the Akashic Records before, it is a giant quantum field that exists in the fifth dimension and above that houses all of the information about every lifetime our souls have had, every universe that exists, every galaxy, every planet. It's basically an infinite, giant quantum database of anything and everything in this reality. Now, you may ask, why are we talking about centaurs on Sirius? Well, if you watch my most recent YouTube video, I asked the Akashic Records the question, are the people from the Avatar movie real? The answer was most certainly yes. And if you haven't watched my most recent video, The Real Story of the Avatar People, go check it out now. It's the video right before this one. And in that video, I discovered that the Avatar people were ultimately destroyed by a group of centaurs who had invaded Sirius. Now, this was not what I was expecting to see. I had always thought of centaurs as gentle, magical, and powerful creatures, but not villains. So I knew I had to investigate this further. So I went back into the Akashic Records and I asked to learn the story behind this group of centaurs that had invaded and destroyed the civilization of the Avatar people on Sirius. So that is what we are going to be talking about today. But before we get started, I want to quickly remind everyone that I have a couple of freebies linked below. For those of you who are wanting to open up your third eye and psychic abilities, I have a free third eye activation meditation. I also have Starseed sticker printables that you can print at home to use as stickers, or they can also just be used as really fun designs for your phone or computer background. Or you could even print them out as a poster. Really, you can use them for whatever you want to do. All right, so let's get started and get into the story of the centaurs on Sirius. Okay, so when I went into the Akashic Records, I was asking a ton of questions about these centaurs that I saw on Sirius B when I was channeling information about the Avatar people. And what quickly became very apparent to me was that this group that I had seen on Sirius B was a very particular subset of centaurs. So basically, they are not representative of all centaurs. Because what I initially saw in the video about the Avatar people is that these centaurs actually came to Sirius B and took control of the Avatar people, to control their land, their resources, and ultimately they treated the Avatar people like their slaves. So pretty much off the bat, I was like, these centaurs weren't necessarily good guys. So I think it's very important to state here that this is just one particular group of centaurs that we're going to be learning about their particular story today. Not all centaurs will fall into this villain category. So the Akashic Records showed me the planet that these centaurs came from. It could very much be described as a paradise planet. It was absolutely beautiful. It was covered in sparkly, multicolored sand, the main colors of the sand being pink and blue. Think of this planet as very similar to the land we see the centaurs living in the classic Disney movie Fantasia. The Akashic Record showed me that this planet they came from was entirely populated by centaurs. And if you've ever read the Akatar series and you're familiar with the continent that the Fae lives on and how it is broken up into different courts, for example, the Spring Court, the Night Court, etc., then it was similar to this. There were several different courts where the centaurs lived and each had its own rulers, hierarchies, and rich families that led each group. In the records, I was shown that despite the beauty and abundance of this planet, there are a lot of problems on this planet too. For example, I was shown that the wealth was kept to a few select families and groups and that there was a type of slave trade that existed on the planet. I was even shown that many of these slaves were forced to perform, similar to how we would see individuals performing in circuses for others' entertainment. In one of these courts, there was an uprising against the leadership, culture, and traditions of the current elite, and a rogue group of centaurs took over and destroyed one of the courts. Traditionally, in this culture, there was a sort of religion or spiritual practice in place. The way they showed it to me felt like a polytheistic approach, with multiple gods who also looked like centaurs. This group rejected this old religion and had lost touch with their spirituality completely, so they fell into a very heathenistic type of behavior. This was ultimately a response to being controlled by a ruling elite, with the gods and old religion used as a tool to control them. What ended up happening to the Centaurs is very similar to how, in the Akatar series, the Spring Court starts to break apart and is eventually destroyed by Tamlin's downfall, while the other courts remain. And similar to the Akatar series, when the Spring Court did fall, some of the Centaurs from the fallen court were able to escape to other courts and get out. But for the ones that didn't, they were kicked off of the planet and sent to another galaxy. Our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. The rulers of this centaur planet did not want this unrest to spread to their areas of the planet. They saw this rogue group of centaurs as a problem and were happy to hand them over to their galaxy's authorities. So exactly who were these galactic authorities? None other than the avian beings that are also responsible for sending over the Draconians to our galaxy. So, what I gathered from this is that the avian beings were kind of the galactic regulators of this galaxy, and that they had had enough of these centaurs. And the leaders of the centaur planet were more than willing, very happy to hand over these rebel centaurs to the Galactic Authority. So, this group of rebel centaurs got sent through a portal into the Milky Way galaxy, similar to the Draconians. With this, it seems that these ancient avian beings saw the Milky Way galaxy as a kind of garbage pit for their trash, or maybe more so like the British Empire used Australia to send their prisoners to. Once the centaurs were kicked out of their galaxy, they spent some time in some type of liminal space. It didn't appear to be 3D, but felt more 2D and appeared to be lines and colors existing in outer space, and given the centaur's physical form, they couldn't stay there for long, so they continued on their journey through the portal and they ended up on, you guessed it, planet Earth. Now, when they got to planet Earth, it was during the time of the dinosaurs when they arrived. The centaurs did not appreciate being left on Earth. They were annoyed with the avians that had sent them through the portal into the planet. And when they first got through the portal and found themselves on planet Earth, they were basically dumped there without any food or resources. So basically their only option was to steal and take from others. Now, you might ask, who exactly were they stealing from? Well, this was also the time on the planet where the Draconians had control of the planet and had built little replicas of themselves, aka the dinosaurs. Images I viewed in the records looked like the Centaurs did not have a good relationship with the Draconians, and the two groups were fighting with each other. There were also early stages of human beings on the planet, similar to what we think of as caveman. But the Centaurs saw how much control the Draconians already had over all of the beings on this planet and felt that there was not much control or power that they could have on the planet due to the Draconians already being in power. During this time, there were some instances of the dinosaurs killing off some of the centaurs. This was typically done by the larger animals we see in movies such as the T-Rex and water dinosaurs who look similar to whales. Also, during the fighting and battles with the Draconians, some of the centaurs were captured by the Draconians and kept as their prisoners for information or to be used as an example to the other centaurs of what would happen if they tried to rise against the Draconians. Eventually, a group of ETs that was on a mission to planet Earth from Sirius A showed up, and they allowed the centaurs to hop a ride back to Sirius with them, depositing them on Sirius B. The beings from Sirius A did not understand the full extent that was to occur from depositing the centaurs on Sirius B, as the centaurs hid many of their intentions and true nature from them. The centaurs felt like they could do more on Sirius B than they could on Earth because it was not controlled by the Draconians. They also felt that it was the most manipulatable place they could go, as they had more advanced weaponry than the native people who lived there. They also just had a spirit of wanting power and wanting to control. Because of this, they thought that they were better than the native people of Sirius B. There were two planets that they had the option of going to once they got to Sirius B. There were disagreements between the centaurs about which planet to go to. So, just a few centaurs ended up on the main planet, aka a planet where they had more advanced civilization and organizational structure. There they were quickly outnumbered and captured. Two of the centaurs were able to escape prison, and they left the civilization where they had been imprisoned in and went on a pilgrimage to ancient temples that were once used by the ancient peoples of Sirius. There the centaurs reconnected with their inner divinity and spirituality and lived out the rest of their lives in a solitary, monk-like state. The rest of the centaurs, the majority of the centaurs, were left on another planet, where the native people on the planet were much more similar to what we would think of as Native Americans or a more tribal type of people. This is the planet where the centaurs' plan actually worked. Once the Centaurs were deposited on this planet, they observed the native people for a while in secret and figured out how they worked, their customs, their lifestyle, their day-to-day routine. Once the Centaurs were ready to start their invasion, they took the same approach that a gang would take. They started with small areas on the outskirts of the main civilization, and then they slowly started taking over the entire civilization. They created a wall of destruction in their path. They burned down different villages and destroyed communities. So, if you remember, this topic of the Centaurs invading Sirius B originally came to me when I was channeling about the Avatar people, aka asking the question if the blue people we see in the Avatar movies are actually real. I confirmed that they were, and that they were eventually driven into slavery by a group of centaurs. So, as we go through this story, you can imagine or relate it to what you've seen in the Avatar movies. Eventually, the centaurs controlled an entire region of this planet. The centaurs built systems across this part of the planet and transported the Avatar people, now their slaves, from one location to another. As they had control of the Avatar people, they controlled all of their belongings too and would transport many goods across these systems as well. The centaurs felt that now was finally their chance to have power and control, a "this is all ours" way of thinking. The centaurs took over the homes of the people of Sirius B that they conquered and redecorated them, or did what they wanted to with the Avatar people's homes and city structures. For reference, think about how, in the 2023 Barbie movie, Ken takes over Barbie's house and calls it Ken's Mojo Dojo Casa House. He kept the pink Barbie structure, but redecorated it with all of his stuff. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about what the centaurs were up to, I also asked some questions about what they were like. I asked the Akashic Records if they were 3D, 4D, or 5D, and the answer received was that these centaurs didn't like being on Earth in the third dimension, and that they much preferred being on Sirius as the planets there were higher dimensional. They are also capable of astral projecting themselves onto spaceships for communication, which is also referred to as remote viewing sometimes. One thing that was also shown to me is that these centaurs rode these space bike types of crafts. These were the only transportation that they were able to bring through the portal with them. This is why they didn't have their own spaceships and had to rely on transportation from others. They look like some type of scooter or motorbike with a platform at the bottom. Remember, these centaurs do have 4 legs like a horse, so they wouldn't be able to ride a motorcycle the same way a human could. So, the centaurs would use these space bikes for transportation, but they also like showing off and doing tricks on them. This is one of the ways that they really like to show off their rebellious spirit. They also showed me that these bikes were used to travel and transport themselves across water. They would dock them or leave them above water, maybe on an island or cluster of rocks. They also showed me that the centaurs can swim a little bit, but they have to come up for water frequently. The centaurs had stations set up throughout the oceans and bodies of water on Sirius, kind of like large floating platforms. On these large floating platforms, they could land their flying bikes. They use these floating platforms as bases or meeting centers. So many of these centaurs actually did have wings, but some still preferred to use the bikes for transportation, partly because it was easier and faster, but also sometimes the centaur's wings would be in disuse, or there were even cases when the centaur's wings had been removed. So these bikes served as a good use of transportation. It was noted that pretty much all of the centaurs were born with wings, unless there was some kind of abnormality or injury. The majority of the centaurs were blue, although there were some that were brown and green. Many had a rough type of look to them, and this was due to the negative frequency that they were operating from. They were also not very connected to their third eye or spirituality. They were very into conquering others and were more in devotion to service to self than service to others. As mentioned earlier, they rejected the spirituality and beliefs of their ancestors and community, and rejected the ancient gods of their people. They definitely came across as a group operating on autopilot who were more focused on their day-to-day than thinking about spirituality or connecting to God's source energy. They definitely seem to have polarity in their gender, with gender separated strongly into female and male. The majority of the centaurs that were banished into this galaxy were male. Due to this, most of the extracurricular activities they had were more masculine in nature, such as arm wrestling and gambling. The energy in the group was very similar to how you might see inmates interacting in a prison. So, what ended up happening with these centaurs? Eventually, the Galactic Federation caught on to what they were doing, and they were asked to leave Sirius B by the Galactic Federation. And by then, their numbers were dwindling, and there were not enough of them to continue controlling the part of the planet that they had conquered anyway. A part of this was because, out of the initial prisoners banished into this galaxy, the majority of those centaurs were male, so they were not really able to reproduce in this galaxy. There were also some of these centaurs who passed away simply because of circumstances, and some died in battles and interactions with the Draconians on Earth and during the conquering of Sirius B. It is important to note that the slavery on Sirius B no longer exists, and that there was also some level of redemption with these centaurs. Some of the centaurs redeemed themselves through making better life choices, and some of these centaurs ended up working directly with the Galactic Federation. Ultimately, their path was kind of like that of prisoners. While they weren't allowed to continue orchestrating their operations on Sirius B due to the serious damage they had caused the native people there, they did have the opportunity for rehabilitation through working with the Galactic Federation. In fact, many of these centaurs have now stepped into spirit guide roles for many humans here on Earth. They especially like to help individuals who are currently living through similar life circumstances to what they went through. For example, they might serve as a spirit guide for an individual who is currently incarcerated or part of gang activity. They like to serve as guides to individuals who are correcting their path and learning how to forgive themselves after committing some type of crime. So here is an action figure picture I made. This was during the whole make an action figure picture of myself trend on TikTok. And so I made this picture, and this is actually depicting my primary spirit guide, Michael. He is one of these centaurs who is blue, has these wings, right? And he now serves as a guide to me. So he was also someone that kind of came in when I was channeling this information as well to kind of illustrate that these group of centaurs did exist. So as you can see, a lot of these centaurs are now actively acting as spirit guides for humans here on Earth. Now, there are a small subset of these centaurs that did not redeem themselves, and they are still living and reincarnating in a lower frequency with a service to self mindset. But it does feel like the majority of the centaurs have grown as souls and are now using the lessons they've learned as centaurs to help others. And so that's it. That's the story of the centaurs on Sirius. Thank you so much for listening. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, I have a listing of all of the many types of galactic and past life sessions that I offer linked below, especially if you want to know your galactic origins. I specialize in helping people remember what star system they came from and what their soul mission is here on Earth. AKA, why are you here at this specific point in history at this time to help the planet and all of the beautiful humans on it? Like I mentioned earlier, I have some freebies linked below, including a free third eye activation meditation and some starseed sticker printables, so please make sure to check those out before you click to the next page. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something valuable today.